when they spit at people, you know, they spit. That's their new thing. They spit, and worse, you know what they throw at them, right? And when that happens, I have a little statement. They say, they spit, we hit. And I told them, nobody's going to spit on our police officers. Nobody's going to spit on our military, which they do as a common thing. They get up to them this far away, and then they start spitting in their face. That happens, they get hit very hard.
All right, that brings us to our next conversation. Joining us now, Democratic Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut. Thank you very much for coming on this morning, focusing on Los Angeles and the Marines that are standing by. What's your take on where this is headed?
Well, I think it's first important to point out that Donald Trump is just not telling the truth. There's been property damage, but these are pretty isolated protests. There's just no doubt that the local law enforcement can handle them. And, we've all listened to Donald Trump's affection for martial law. We've watched him try to destroy our democracy and the rule of law over the last 6 months. And so, of course, it's incredibly concerning to see him threatening a federal takeover here. This is the first time in 60 years that you've had a president deploy the National Guard without a request of the local governor. But it can also be true that everything that's happened in the last 7 days between the fight with Elon Musk and now the deployment of the National Guard is probably also a distraction from the main story, which is that right now Donald Trump is trying to pass probably the most unpopular piece of legislation that he will attempt to move through Congress in his first term. He's going to throw 15 million people off their health care in order to fund a massive tax cut for the wealthy. It's going to add $2 trillion to our deficit. We're probably going to head into a recession. And so I do also think he's probably doing everything he can to try to get the entire political world to be talking about anything other than a piece of legislation that's going to fundamentally change this country. So, yeah, we have to point out the danger of what he's proposing to do in Los Angeles while also keeping our eye on the ball, which is a bill that's going to transform our economy and ruin a lot of lives.
Many things can be true at the same time. Having said that, people are very upset about these ICE raids in Los Angeles for these poor, terrified families. The initial promise was that these deportations would be for criminals only. That's clearly not what's happening here as they're trying to make certain numbers. What's your message to protesters? And also, what can elected officials do at this point? And your take on how Gavin Newsom is doing?
Well, I mean, my first message is to keep it peaceful. I mean, obviously, this is a moment where we have to be on the streets all over the country to protest what's happening to our immigrant community, but more broadly to protest what's happening to our democracy. This is the most corrupt administration in the history of the country, and we are going to rise to this moment by being out there on the streets. But ultimately, I think the country sees what Donald Trump is trying to do here. He's looking for a fight. There's nothing in what he is doing that is about peace or about restoring order. He's taking a protest that is relatively isolated. People in Los Angeles over the weekend would tell you that 99% of them went about their day, and it was pretty normal because this is not an invasion that has taken over the entire city. And he's trying to turn a protest that is pretty small into something that involves an even bigger confrontation so that he might actually be able to invoke the Insurrection Act. That would be a defining story of the week if he were to do it. And I just don't think, I think we have to make sure that we understand to not take him at his word. He's looking for a fight. He's not trying to calm tensions.
Senator, we'll turn to the bill in just a moment. One last beat on this. Is there any peril you see for Democrats, though, to be dismissive of what is happening there? If there is an image of a burning car, let's say, if there is some violence, even if it's isolated, what are the political risks here? How do you talk about that?
Well, listen, I think you make it clear that we only are for peaceful protest, but I don't think the American public wants martial law. I think the American public knows that local law enforcement can handle these protests. And, what we also have to talk about is that, Donald Trump only cares about protests when they're opposing him. I mean, every single day we should be reminding the American public that there were protesters at the Capitol fighting for Donald Trump to install him in power permanently on January January 6th of 2021 who beat the hell out of police officers with metal poles and tasers and are out on the street today. So Donald Trump only cares about quelling violent protest or quelling protest writ large when it's protest against him. That's fundamentally undemocratic. And it's frankly an invitation for more violence on the streets. The message is simply, if you're violent in service of a Republican cause, you'll get a get-out-of-jail-free card. But if you're engaged in protest against the administration, well, then we're sending in the National Guard.
So, Senator, you were just on Twitter a few moments ago suggesting that, look, you got to do two things at once. Talk about this, but keep your eye on the ball. And in your estimation, that is indeed the legislation that's now in the Senate. Give us a sense as to what you see of it, and also what you're hearing from your Republican colleagues there, who a week or so back, as it was finishing up in the House, made clear they had some reservations.
Well, of course they have reservations. This is a bill that will ruin people's lives all across the country. You're talking, as I mentioned, about a bill that would throw 15 million people off of their health care. And for what? In order to fund a new massive tax cut for the wealthy and corporations, the richest Americans would get reportedly a $270,000 tax cut from this bill. And the bill would actually make 40% of the American public poorer, because the tax cuts for the poor and the middle class are like table scraps. But they'd lose their nutrition benefits for their kids. They'd lose their health care. They'd lose a whole bunch of services. Yes, I think Republicans are taking a look at this and wondering whether they can survive re-election. And so there is a chance that we can get the 4 votes in the Senate we need to stop this abomination of a bill. But it does require us talking about it. There was a CBS poll in the last week that suggested only about 30% of Americans know that there's a piece of legislation in front of the Congress that would do this much damage to the economy. So that makes sense. Donald Trump's going to distract you with a fight with Elon Musk. He's going to distract you with National Guard troops, because he knows that if only 30 or 40% of the American public know that he's about to throw 15 million people off of their health care, working families, then maybe Republicans won't be under the kind of pressure that they should be under to stop it.
Democratic Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut. Thank you, Senator, for joining us this morning.